see you all here. Just a second, our cords are all tangled up here and I can't move. All right, let's try that again. It was a little weak. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you all. Let's stand. This morning, this song says, "Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down." I hope you came this morning to lift up God's name. He's worthy of your praise. He's done so much for us. So let's just take this time to sing some songs and to praise Him and to get our hearts tuned towards Him this morning. Light of the world, let's go ahead. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see. Beauty that made this heart adore You. Oh, marvelous, spend with You. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that You're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, and so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly You came to the earth You created, all for my sake became born. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that You're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that You're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that You're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Praise His name this morning. He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Let's lift Him up this morning. Round Him with many crowns, but on His throne, I bow down humbly and content, all music by His throne. I'll make my soul and sing, on Him who died for me, and Him who has my us what we need. And I just want to thank you this morning for his great love and his grace to me in my heart and my life. Let's sing this song out to him and proclaim as our strength. You are my strength when I am weak. You are my treasure that I seek. You are my all in all. Seeking you as a precious jewel, Lord, to give up might be a fool. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Taking my sin, my cross, my shame, rising up here, I praise your name. You are my all in all. When I fall down, you pick me up. When I am dry, you fill my cup. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Listen closely to these words. Thank you for what he's done for us. I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. I'm accepted. You were condemned. I'm alive and well. Your spirit is within me because you died and rose again. I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. I'm accepted. You were condemned. I'm alive and well. Spirit is within me because you died and rose again. Amazing love can be into my King
My grandparents, I was fortunate to have them all until I was an adult. It doesn't always happen, but that was a great blessing to me. On my father's side, my grandfather was Frederick Gustav Horn. On my mother's side, it was Frederick Frankfurt Kohler. So if you believe anything about heritage and stereotypes, it may explain why I might be a little bit stubborn and I love sauerkraut. But I was born in Detroit, raised in the suburbs there. My paternal grandparents lived there also. My maternal grandparents always lived in New Middletown, which is, I don't know, somewhere over there. And we spent all of our vacations. We left the day after school was out and returned the day after the Canfield Fair and went back to Detroit. But I spent all my summers and holidays on the farm in New Middletown, which I loved. I was very close to those grandparents. My grandmother was a perfect farmer's wife and grandmother in my eyes. We didn't have a lot when we were growing up. But if it weren't for Grandma's gifts in the mail, we'd get a winter coat, we'd get some gloves, get some clothes in the fall. Mom said we never would have made it without that. So from her I learned to give to others when you see the need. She was gracious that way. When I was there, she made my play clothes, sometimes out of her dresses or Mom's blouses, whatever she had. She was in the garden club, and I used to go to some of those meetings, and when I was a kid, that really didn't set well with me. But I had a stand out in front of their house with vegetables and things on it that I sold, and I put that money in a jar, and that was my money for the Canfield Fair every year. Although looking back on it now, I think I spent a lot more than what was in that jar. I never saw that change after that, but somehow it managed to create more. I watched her and Grandpa raise the food that they ate. They only ate what they grew and what they raised. They did the butchering, and they raised a lot of crops. They had 2 very large gardens. I wish that I had the time to do it as much as I used to, or as much as they did, but I remember, slicing peaches and freezing strawberries and canning meats and just anything, everything, because they had to have it for the winter, and I loved that. Grandma's house was neat and clean. I wish I could say mine was always the same, but I'm a work in progress, I guess. She was a milliner and a baker. Does anybody know what a milliner is anymore? Mrs. Burkott does. It's a hat maker. And she had some amazing hats that she wore. I wish I had kept them. I would wake up, because they left the blinds up so that they'd wake up, because Grandpa had to milk at 4:30 and 4:30. If you know anything about farms, the cows never let you rest. And so they'd be up before dawn. And by the time I got up, which was sometime later, there might be rhubarb sauce cooking, and maybe a peach pie, maybe bread. It was just amazing smells at Grandma's house. They were really hardworking people between the milking and the hay and the alfalfa and the chickens and the turkeys and all that. It was wonderful, wonderful to see. And they taught me that hard work will help you to provide for yourself. That sitting around isn't going to get you anywhere. Grandma worked at school. She was a baker at the high school, Wilson High School in Youngstown, and Grandpa sold insurance on the side. Being a farmer, I have no idea how he had time on the side, but he did. So they were never idle. I asked my grandmother oftentimes as I got older, how do you make this, or how do you make that? She never wrote anything down. It's, a little bit of this, and maybe this much of that, and a pinch of that. So I never got her recipe. One recipe I had to take that back. But that was it. She was frugal, and she taught me frugality. I don't always practice it, but in her day, if you had slivers of soap left, you didn't throw them away. When you had several, you just sort of melded them together, and you had a new bar of soap. And when your washcloths wore out, you sewed 2 of them together. That's what you had. And she darned socks. If anybody's ever worn a darned sock, that's like having a big stone in your shoe. But it worked, She made it work. She washed tin foil in plastic bags. I said, Grandma, I am never going to wash tin foil, and I am never going to wash plastic bags. That just isn't going to happen. I buy new tin foil when I need it, but I wash the plastic bags now. My kids make fun of me. I can't quite get away from that. I learned to sew when I was 12, and I had a lot of inspiration from Grandma. I made all my clothes when I was in high school. It was just, the older I got, the more I wanted to be like her. And I didn't have a spiritual heritage on either side of the family, but I had some good heritage from them anyhow. I love to cook. I love to bake. I'm trying to get away from that because I really like to eat what I've cooked and baked, but I like to do it for other people's families. She taught me how to make a home, how to take care of other people when they couldn't, and it was just an amazing heritage to have them in my life. Only one at this point.
Thank you, Gail. We're going to make a change. Instead of going to Sebring Elementary, we're going to her grandma's house for dinner. So Krista is going to share a few words.
Is it on? Okay. Pastor asked me last night if I would say some stuff about grandparents, and I'm a little nervous, so I don't know how this is going to work. I am very lucky. I have both my mom's parents and my dad's parents here close to me. Each of my grandparents have taught me something different and special. My grandma Agnew has taught me the gift of giving, being able to give to other people what you have learned in memories. And both grandparents have given me that. My grandpa has taught me, my grandpa Agnew has taught me being quiet is sometimes good. Though I don't practice that one very often. My grandpa Burka has taught me perseverance, even when it doesn't seem to other people to be the best thing. My grandma Burka has taught me many, many things. She's taught me that I can until about 3 years ago, I didn't really know my grandma. I remember one day Daddy coming home and saying, "Grandma, I cleaned your piano off," and then she was playing again. Grandma plays the piano? And we soon learned that Grandma plays the piano. And I learned from her that how much God loves me. I can tell her anything, and she'll listen. I learned not to try to wash a car at night. And so many other things from the stories that her neighbors have told me. Thank you, Grandma.
Thank you, Krista. You did a wonderful job. I'm going to ask John McCora to come and share a few words.
Of course, my heritage is not from here, so what happened there is a little different than what you're used to. And Mason found out firsthand about that. On my dad's side, my grandparents were Orthodox, so their relationship with God was very minimal, and it was mostly based on what the priest said, and if it was a holiday, or if it was a funeral, or a wedding, or just very major things. So if it was a major event, then God was mentioned, and God was part of life, and so on and so forth. And they have traditions that, if I explain them to you, it would take probably half a day. Why and how, and it would sound very strange, but to them, it's pretty much like the Catholic Church has certain traditions that they've acquired over the years, and that's what they do. And I don't know all the details of them, but anyway, the one thing that I remember from my dad's, wait, did I say my dad's parents? No, I'm thinking about my mom's parents. Those are my mom's parents. My grandma on my mom's side was a very good cook. We only got to see them every 3 years because they live across country, and we traveled 12 hours by train, 1 hour by car to get to their house. So when we went, we came back with twice as much luggage because Grandma always had stuff to send with us. She always sent us packages in the mail too. So she kept us supplied with all kinds of stuff, but her food was awesome. When we went there, I can't imagine. I can't remember everything, but I remember some things. We had the greatest times with our cousins out there and great food. My grandpa, my mom's dad, the one thing that he taught me was at our mournery. And Mason learned that thing too, because my grandpa used to always rub my head with his knuckles. He made a knuckle sandwich. But he didn't call it a knuckle sandwich. He said, "I'm getting some whale oil out of your head." And that's why I'm rubbing so hard. My dad's parents were the ones that were really close to God, and they are the ones that were the example for me, because my mom and dad were not so close to God, and they sometimes went to church and they sometimes didn't. And they knew it was important. They told us kids that it is important, and they took us to church. But most of the time, I was going to church on a regular basis because I was very interested, and I was very close to God, and God was very close to me, and He was drawing me and everything. So that set of grandparents is actually who had the most influence spiritually on me. This grandma was a very good cook too. The one thing that I remember about her cooking was she had plum trees, and she would get the ripe plums, and she would make this pie, but it's not like a round pie, it was a square pie, okay? But she would make it in the earth oven outside, along with bread. I don't know if you've had homemade bread, and some of you I know have had homemade bread in those machines at home, whatever. But these are homemade breads made in an earthen oven, so the pots are big. Okay, so you get big round breads, really. And we always got them hot out of the oven and put butter on them. Oh. I miss those times really bad. Then the plum pie was about this thick, and about more than half of it was just plums and plum juice inside. And we always had to wait because, of course, we burn ourselves on them. But we were like, "Come on, Grandma, can we have some? Can we have some? Can we have some?" Both of my granddads have died since the last 4 or 5 years, and I haven't been able to be to their funerals. But I keep in touch with my grandmas. They're still alive. I keep calling them and talking to them and hoping that one of these days I'll go see them before they do die. And they say the same thing. So hopefully when I get there, I will get to eat some of their good food.
All right, Tiffany Gentry is going to share with us.
My grandfather was Reverend Harley Newman, and when I was asked to speak about him, I was really speechless, because in my eyes, he was perfect, and you just had to know him. Thinking about him floods my heart with memories, and my eyes and cheeks with tears. He was a meek and humble man, but what stands out to me the most was how he loved and he forgave like Christ. A drunk driver had hit him and my grandma in 1982 that took my grandma's life and left him in a coma for several months to where he missed her funeral and burial. Shortly after that, he stepped down from his pastoral duties to grieve her loss, and for 10 years he struggled to forgive the man that took his wife of 28 years. He wrote that man periodically in jail, reminding him that he loved him and he forgave him through Christ, and would hope he would accept forgiveness from Christ also. Then almost 25 years later, he practiced that same love and forgiveness again when a situation with an individual had come to light and nearly destroyed our family. He wrote this individual every week for 3 years till his passing. He told my sisters and I that he wrote this individual because that was his way of letting God work in his life to love and forgive that man and not let the bitterness take hold of him. Throughout my life, I never seen his faith waver through trials. Sure, I seen him grieve and I seen him cry, but through his sorrows, he would get up in church and start proclaiming God's victory in his life. And then my sisters and I knew we needed to clear the aisle because Papa was on his way. And then he'd start shouting and walking the aisles, claiming victory and praising God for who he was. He would not stop until he had prayed through. I miss his hearty amens when he agreed with the pastors and his "Oh dear Lord, touch him" when he didn't agree. I knew every Thursday to cook extra and leave a spot at the dinner table because he would come just before dinner to have dinner, and I dare not fix fish or rice. What precious memories Tori has of teasing and fun with him, and she was almost 3 years old when he had passed, but left such an impression on her life that she still asks to this day, "Is Jesus and Papa happy with me?" If I had questions, I could go to him. They would remain in confidence and be remembered in prayer without fail. He had a massive stroke in 2011 that paralyzed his right side of his entire body and the right side of his brain, and eventually took his life 4 months later. But there again, he never became bitter or blamed God. I would ask him and say, "Papa, do you still pray?" And he would shake his head yes, very passionately. My last night with him was so sacred. He loved to hear my sisters and I sing, and we did all the time. And that night we sang to him, and God's presence came and just filled his room. And then we had visitors coming to the room from the hallway to hear us. And he would raise his arm for us to keep singing and ministering to them, not him. He wanted us to minister to the visitors. And even when he couldn't talk or walk, he still fulfilled God's calling to minister and love people. He left such an impression of Christ to everyone that had met him. He had a very special relationship with the Lord, one that still to this day I've not seen in anyone, which I want to model after, but I fail. I could go on and on and on about his spiritual life and what he meant to me. And I'm sure Tara and Manuel and Wayne, they all went to church with Papa, and they could tell you their own memories of him. But I am the Christian I am today because of his perfect example. He never wavered in his faith. He never wavered for his love for people, and the way he praised God through all his bitterness and through all his trials. I want to live like that also, and I thank the Lord for him.
All right, we're going to close this segment of the service out with Andy Ganji coming and sharing with us.
I've been blessed to know 3 of my grandparents. My mom's father died in 1966, so I never got to meet him. But I want to honor my dad's father, Sebastian Ganji was his name, and been thinking a lot about him. And my dad and I have been doing some genealogical research on his family, and I was just thinking kind of about him and his life, and my grandfather, he was orphaned at, I believe he was about 2 or 3 years old. Actually, he wasn't orphaned. His mother passed away, but his father had abandoned the family, and my dad and I found out yesterday that probably while my grandfather was growing up, he was sitting in the penitentiary in New York State. And then when he got out of there, they shipped him back to Sicily where he belonged. But you know, my grandfather never met him, he doesn't remember him, but he never let that legacy of criminal, abandonment affect his life. My grandfather was injured at a young age. He was shot in the eye by a friend at the orphanage with a BB gun. And so he was blind in one eye. And I remember as a kid when he would drive, sometimes it was a little scary, especially if somebody was on the blind side there. But he was able to drive with one eye. And he drove with his hands, but he used one eye to drive, of course. But my grandfather was raised very poor. He was in a Catholic orphanage. And it's amazing how God had his hand on his life. When his father got out of prison, he came back to the orphanage to collect his son. And the head nun first hid him for a while. And second, she went to court to keep him away from his dad. And all she did was delay long enough until they hauled him back to, we presume, back to Sicily. So anyway, he grew up in the orphanage. He said his first money that he got, I believe he was a teenager, and he helped a woman carry a bag, and she gave him a nickel. And that was the first money that he ever had. My grandfather, because of his eye, when he enlisted during World War II, he had to serve stateside, so he stayed here and he cut hair through the war. He took advantage of the GI Bill and got a degree, and he then went to college and got his degree. And he took a teaching position in Rochester, New York. And he worked an entire career teaching grade schoolers. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in his grade school classes, because just you'd have to know my grandfather. But anyway, he wasn't long on patience, but he was very long on facts. So anyway, I'll tell you one humorous story. My grandpa was very thrifty. Because of being raised poor, he saved a lot of money, and he was very thrifty. So he would wear old clothes that he got from wherever he'd get them from. And they say he wore pants that were like 4 sizes too big for him. So one of his kids in his class took a bread bag that said large economy size and laid it on his seat with tape. And so he sat down on that and walked around all day with a bread bag across his backside that said large economy size. He was also kind of gruff, and he used big words. And one time a kid was being bad, and he said, "You, son, are a disturbing element in this class." And the child went home, and his parents came in enraged, telling the principal that the teacher had called his son a dirty elephant. So anyway, my grandfather retired as soon as he could, and he took a lump sum withdrawal of his finances, and he just began to invest. He was very frugal, but he invested. He and my grandmother traveled all over the world for over 20 years. He fought a 10-year battle with cancer, to which he finally passed away from a few years ago, just a few months after Drew was born. So we were able to get a 4-generation picture, which I think we'll see here in a little bit. And right before my grandfather passed away, I believe by the grace of God, that he made his peace with the Lord. And my dad had some events that happened just in the last few days of his life that witnessed to him and to us as well that he made his peace with God. And I thank God for that. But my grandfather left me a legacy of hard work and of wisdom and consistency that's been a real inspiration to me. And I'm very proud that he was my grandfather. My grandmother's still living. She's my only remaining grandparent that's living. And she's an industrious soul who I love to talk to, and she loves to come visit. And I could say so much about her. But I want to say something about my mom's mother. Laura Stiles Bennett was her name. And my grandmother, she married my grandfather when she was 20 years old. The problem was he was 40 years old and had 6 children. And the youngest was about, I think she was probably about 6 months old when they got married. His first wife had passed away in childbirth with that daughter. And his oldest daughter was about 7 or 8 months younger than my grandmother. And interesting enough, they became best friends until my grandma actually outlived that daughter. But my grandmother was a godly woman, and she raised her children to love the Lord. She prayed for them. My mother abandoned the Lord for a while in her teenage years, and my grandmother prayed for her. My mom loved Volkswagen Beetles, and she worked at a dealership, and they gave her a brand new dealer model all the time. So she would get a run. They lived up on top of a hill with a dirt road. My mom would get going very fast and get on a run. Then she'd shut the motor off and coast all the way up into the driveway, and she would sneak out and take off her shoes and creep into the house and go to her room. So her mom would know that how late she'd been out. The problem was when she did that, Grandma didn't stop praying for her. So Mom had to sit there in her bedroom above her and listen to Grandma pour out her heart to God for her wayward daughter, and it was conviction. And God used that and got a hold of her, and she got back to the Lord. And so I thank God for my grandmother's prayers. Grandma was kind of like some of these other grandmas that we've heard about today. My Grandma Bennett, she loved to cook, and I loved to eat her cooking. And when we would go to her house, she had a drawer in the kitchen. All right, Dan, you woke up long enough to smile at me for that one, didn't you? She had a drawer in her kitchen that had cookies in it, always had cookies. So you could always go out there and you could always depend on it. So Grandma came to our house one day, and she was going to make a pie. Well, my mom made things. She measured everything carefully and followed the recipe. I'm standing here as a little kid and watching my grandma, and she's tossing some of this and tossing some of that and mixing a little bit of this and mixing a little bit of that. And I said, Grandma, don't you measure anything? And she's like, no, I've been doing it for a while. So I left and went into the room and said, Mom, Grandma's making something, but I don't think it's going to taste very good. I said, because she isn't measuring anything. She's just tossing stuff in. And my mom got a big charge out of it and embarrassed me and told my grandma what I said. But you know what? I taste tested and I thought, wow, she really does know what she's doing. This is amazing. So I remember that. But Grandma passed away just a few years after I was married. But the legacy of prayer and consistency and faithfulness to the Lord that she left behind will always be with Wayne and I and the rest of her grandchildren. And I want to honor my great-grandmother. Her name was Mabel Nelson. I always laughed at the name Mabel. But anyway, I never knew her. She died in 1976. But she was my great-grandfather was a hard worker, but he was not a Christian. He was kind of prone to anger, but he was a hard worker, supported his family, and did those things. But he wasn't much in the way of tenderness and love. Of course, unless it came to me, who he would proudly tell all the other great-grandchildren I was his favorite grandchild, much to my grandmother, my dad, and the whole family's chagrin. But anyway, that was Grandpa. But my grandmother, left home early and rebelled against spiritual things. And my great-grandma never stopped praying for her. She never stopped praying for the family. She never stopped praying for all of her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. And because of her prayers, my father was saved. And he was going to move away to Arizona and start a new life with living for the Lord now. But he thought, on my way, I'll stop by his grandmother's home. And she said, oh, Tom, why don't you spend the weekend here with us? So he did. And they needed help cutting some firewood. So my grandfather said, Tom, why don't you spend a week with us? So he did. My grandmother said, Tom, it's so good to have you. Why don't you just spend the month with us? And he did. And then they said, Tom, it's so wonderful to have you. Why don't you spend the summer? And partway through the summer, he met my mom. The rest is history. But my grandmother prayed and prayed for 30 years for the salvation of her grandchildren. And I believe God answered those prayers. And I'm here today because of that. And, as these people left this legacy in my life, I guess the thing that I take away from that is their prayers have been effective in my life, but they're in heaven today. And my children need my prayers, my family, my church. And I just feel that burden today. And I pray that God can help that example to become a reality in my life. And I thank God for how blessed I am and for the legacy that my grandparents have left for me, and I honor them today.
This has turned into a wonderful service. Nancy, I don't think we're going to have the kids go downstairs today. I think we're going to have our ushers prepare to receive the Sunday morning tithes and offerings. And